Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Joey and I will be having an affair with Abdulrazak Gurnah and his short story, Cages. Cages is a poignant exploration of power dynamics, human vulnerability, and the subtle entrapments of life that define as well as confine individuals. Set within a modest, intimate setting, the story explores character interactions, uncovering deep tension, dependency, and unspoken truths. The title, Cages, serves as a metaphor for the different types of confinement experienced by the various characters. Whether it is in the physical space of a shop, socioeconomic constraints, or the psychological entrapment of fear, the story underscores how individuals are often caught up in invisible yet pervasive barriers. The protagonist's journey is marked by a growing awareness of these cages as both personal and systemic barriers. Gurnah's writing masterfully intertwines the personal with the universal, illustrating how larger societal forces such as class, economics, and authority play out in intimate and everyday settings. The story is imbued with a sense of quiet resistance as the protagonist navigates his circumstances, grappling with his own agency and dreams of escape. In this richly detailed narrative, Gurnah invites readers to reflect on the cages that shape human lives, urging a deeper understanding of freedom, constraint, and the complexities of human relationship. I just wanted to ask you, had you encountered this author before?
No, I have not ever heard of this author before. I just happened to be at Barnes & Noble like 2 weeks ago, and I saw his book called Theft, which I'll put it fits right there. And I for some reason, I don't really care about book covers, but I just happened to walk over like, that looks interesting. And I saw the little fake sticker that you can't take off, the permanent sticker that said he was a Nobel Prize winning author. And I was like, how come I've never heard of him? So I didn't actually pick it up, but I did end up buying an ebook copy that I have read since. And I think I just said it was called Theft. But yeah, I have read that now. And now I've read this story. And I've read, I think, one other of his short stories. So I'm not too familiar. I think he has about 11 novels altogether out, but I just happened to stumble upon him because of Barnes & Noble.
I love that, and I think that reflects his idea of change and globalization, so I think he would be very excited that through the power of Barnes & Noble, we were introduced to this great new author. I had never heard of him before reading this story, and I would love to give both of us a really brief overview of his career, because I think he has a really interesting background. Abdulrazak Gurnah is a renowned Tanzanian author, celebrated for his profound exploration of themes like displacement, identity, colonialism, migration, and cultural change. His works resonate with readers across the globe, offering profound insights into the human condition and facing historical realities. By addressing universal themes through the specific cultural and historical context, Gurnah bridges the gap between different perspectives and fosters empathy and understanding. His literary career spans several decades, and his novels are celebrated for their nuanced exploration of human experiences and historical context. Shout out to Joey for finding the novel Theft, so I'm sure we will be talking more about that at some point in the future. Gurnah's works delve into the psychological and moral dilemmas faced by individuals navigating migration, exile, and cultural dislocation. His most recent novel, Afterlives, was published in 2020 and explores the lives of individuals shaped by the upheavals of history. His literary works have earned him critical acclaim, and as Joey noted, Gurnah won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2021. So, Joey, would you like to tell us your first impressions of this story?
So when I saw that his novel Theft was in Barnes & Noble, and I was just like, let me see if he has some short stories available, if he wrote any, and he did, obviously, because I found them. So I was excited to see that because I want to, it's good time to get a flavor of what an author's work is like, is when you can read a short story of theirs just to see. And this is not very long. It's probably like the ebook version was 14 pages, so it's probably like, I don't know, 7 pages if that. So now that I have read his most recent novel, Theft, I see some parallels in how he likes to write characters and his characterization and what he likes to maybe he likes to focus on in theme-wise, which you also mentioned in the beginning. I think that he does a really great job of exploring the psychology of his characters, and there's not much going on in this story. There's really nothing going on in this story, and that is one critique that I've seen maybe it's not a critique, whatever, we'll call it a critique, that I've seen reviewers on like Storygraph, which we're on Storygraph, you guys can follow us there, say like, oh, there's no plot. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not like, this is like hardcore literary fiction. This is this is what this is supposed to be. There's not supposed to be a plot. Which we have talked about many times, the difference between literary and genre fiction. And this is the epitome, this is the definition of literary fiction. It is about the characters, and not just his short story. I'm also talking about theft, but his book Theft, not the crime. Like I said, I could see a lot of parallels in his work. I think this one came out in the 70s, this book, the story, Cage, 1973 or something. I don't remember. Don't quote me. I think it's a little older than now, but for some reason, this story really stuck with me after I read it, because my first impression was kind of like, ew, I don't like how they're talking about this woman, and I'm not sure that I want to read any more of this. And then I sat with it and I was like, I don't think that that's what was happening. I feel like I've come away with a different idea of what this story was supposed to be about, but I will just end and say that I'm going to read I think this is his most famous work, Paradise, which I think came out in 2021, probably. So I don't know. You just said it. But anyway, this is, I think, like the book that he's most well known for. And he was shortlisted for the Booker for this. So I'm sure it's great.
Yeah, Joey, thank you for that. I can echo that. You introduced me to the story and I read it for the first time a couple of days ago, and I'm like, not for me. This is not for me. I do not like anything about this story. And I was talking to my partner, kind of describing the challenges I was having, and he very astutely said, maybe that was the point of the story, that you have to read it again and sit with the feelings that come up as a result of working through this information. And I read the story again right before our conversation this afternoon. And I have to agree with you. There's a moment where it all clicked. And I was like, all right, he's talking about these very specific little microcosms in the world, but also reflecting these much larger trends. And for me, I was so thankful to have read the story again, because as you know, sometimes we get a little off track. If we read it real quickly once, you may lose the nuance of the story. So I was feeling very grateful that it was a very short story. But I guess note to readers, listeners, if you are struggling with it or thinking like, what was the actual point of this story? Because literally nothing happens. Like, nothing happens in the story that you could follow in a plot line. As you so articulately said, Joey, this is literary fiction. This is literary writings that's supposed to evoke emotion and let you sit with it. It's not necessarily one thing happened, then the next thing happened, and then everybody goes home happy. So yeah, I was very excited to put aside my initial resistance to the story. I was like, hey, Joey, how about you convince me what a great story this is? Because I'm not having it. I'm just not having it.
Yeah, I think the part that kind of got us both like, I don't know about this story, is the misogyny towards and sexualization of the character Rukia, because there is a character named Mansur who is just a pig, but I think I know why, and I will explain that, because of course you cannot, well, at least I think I'll explain it. This is my opinion of it, but I think that is the part that's like, ew, gross. Like, if that wasn't in it, I wouldn't have had thought maybe like twice about being like, oh, this is a fine story, it's literary fiction. I was so curious, like, well, why is this in here? Because I've only read out only one of his other novels yet so far. So that's not the impression that I've gotten from him as an author. My impression of Gurnah is that he isn't writing something to be misogynistic, because in his newest novel, Theft, women are presented as nuanced, complicated, and, there's not misogyny that I could see in it. Maybe there is, but I did not see it. So what I think is going on, and you mentioned, obviously, because the story is titled Cage, which I think is very interesting, because a lot of the times when we read stories, the title of the story is somewhere within the story. And this one is not. A cage is never mentioned. So we're already kind of going in there to this story thinking like, why is this called Cage? And then you get to the end, you're like, well, you never even brought it up. Why did you call it that? a good man is hard to find. That is a line in the story. There's so many, I mean, there's a million. I can go through all of the stories, but it's so often that is the case. So it's interesting that he named something that he never actually names in the story. But anyway, I will leave it there because I want to come back to my theory of why Mansur is a little misogynist pig.
I prefer your first interpretation, Joey, so we're going to go right with that. I also agree with you. The story, had that character been just plucked out and the story unfolded without Mansur being part of it, I would be like, no problem. And I have an inkling, Joey, that I may understand where you're going with why you think he's in there. So I am going to withhold my comments until I hear yours. But I think we might be on the same track. And our misogyny detectors are kind of set pretty well. So I think if it's there, we're going to detect it. And if it's not there, we won't. So that's our disclaimer.
No, it's definitely in there. I don't think it's a reflection of the author is what I meant. But I think Mansur is doing something. He is showing his own cage in this story because we have, as you mentioned, all of the characters, and there's only like, 4? Yeah, there's 4 characters. All of them have a cage of some type, whether it's a physical cage like the shop that Hamid lives in and works in, or it's a metaphorical sort of societal structure like patriarchy, and that's where we have misogyny. I think that Mansur is gay because in the text, Hamid says he could not keep away from the boys. And I don't think in this context that he meant children. I think he's a pedophile because Hamid is not entirely sure if he's not hanging around the shop because he's not sexually attracted to him. So I think that he is acting out with hyper toxic masculinity to mask his homosexuality because I'm not sure when this takes place or they don't really give us a place. I know that he likes to write about stories in Zanzibar and Tanzania, which I'd never seen pictures of Zanzibar, and oh my goodness, it looks amazing, and I would love to go there. So I'm going to assume that it takes place probably somewhere in that region, but the time frame, I have no idea. It could have been, whenever this story was written. I'm pretty sure it was 1973. I don't know why that's in my head, but I could be completely wrong. But whatever, I'm going to say that that's probably a little bit older. It's not of the time now. So I have a feeling that Mansur is doing it purposely because he wants to mask himself, and he thinks my sexuality will not come into question if I act like this towards women. If I'm sort of a caricature of masculinity, okay, this is not what masculinity means, but if he's trying to put on that show and that facade, then that doesn't have to come up. He can still hang out with all the guys and have sex with them, but never be called out for being homosexual. So that's my idea, is that's his cage.
Well, I love that idea, Joey. That's not exactly where I was going. I do remember reading he likes to hang out with the boys, but again, my ability to understand the subcontext of that, I was like, right, when you say it, it makes a lot more sense what he was actually doing with those young men. That I think that Mansur was in there because he exists in the world. Women in this community are being faced with that. I do think it's very interesting. Reading the story, it does not feel like there's a specific time frame at all that's referenced. I couldn't pinpoint that for you at all based on anything that was mentioned, with the teeny tiny exception that they asked for. I think she asked for a cup of ghee or a cup of sugar, and it was 1 shilling. I was like, don't know how much a shilling is either today or in 1973, so I do not know. That was the only thing that could even slightly place it on a timeline. And I'm glad that you reminded us that this may be a masking mechanism of this gentleman. He's like, hey, I can't live my truth, so I am just going to pretend. Let's just take the worst example of male chauvinism, and I'll just live it. I'll just embody that. And he nailed it, unfortunately.
I think that you're correct in that, like, I can't place this in time. And I think something that you have talked about a few times now is that a mark of great literature is its timelessness. And in this case, it's literally timeless because we cannot assign a time to it. But I think we can all see that, or we can both see, it's only 2 of us, that we could both see that this could happen at any time. And to your point, you're saying, like, Rukia is facing misogyny and harassment, and that's not, like, it doesn't have to be time specific. That's just going to it's always happened, and it's going to keep happening, unfortunately. So that doesn't help us figure out a timestamp for this. But I do really like that Gurnah explores all of these different types of cages, and whether I'm right or wrong about Mansour, I have no idea. That is just my idea about that. But I really liked the exploration of the character of Fajir because he is encased in a cage of old age and illness. He has some I don't remember what it was that he's sick with, but we can assume he's not doing well and it's probably terminal, whether that's from old age or if it's just from, whatever's going on. And I liked how that was considered a cage because instead of making it, there's sometimes where it's like when someone is fighting a disease, it almost comes off as heroic. And I think that could be like troublesome sometimes because like what if you lose your battle, then like are you not heroic? I don't know, that's not for me to decide. I guess, but that terminology feels very strange to me. So I liked that it was a very realistic depiction of illness and how Hamid was saying like the room was perfumed with it because it's just like it's also like another physical cage where it's not miasma, we all know that's not real, but it's like encasing himself and everybody else around him. So good job, Gurnah.
And Joey, I love that you took us to the passage where it said, he could smell the perfume of an aging, dying man. And it was contrasted with earlier in the story, they said the young girl also had this perfume, this essence. And I thought that was very interesting because there's so much sensuality and physical experience in here. You are looking at the color of her dress and you are hearing these sounds and sights and you're feeling this oppression of Fajir said hadn't left his house in years because of his infirmary. I read the information about the author's, Mr. Gurnah's background. I think is pretty provocative. I think he wants to throw these things out and say, is this the world we're creating? Is this what we want to do? And so I just really, I really appreciated you taking us to that place, Joey, about the being in a physical cage. And it reminds me of the Arcade Fire song, which is now running through my head, My Body as a Cage. I'm sure I will be referencing that again later. Joey.
Yeah, I want to read that little section of when Hamid is talking about going out with Fajir, because Hamid is a hermit, basically. He could be close to agoraphobic. He has not gone out in a very long time and seems to not even know that he lives close to the beach. Like he's like, when did this get here? So it's so interesting that this character, so much is happening in his life, but it's just in such a confined space. But let me just read the little section. So Gurnah writes, it was well over a year since he had even left the shop, and before then he had only gone with Fajir before the old man was bedridden. Fajir had taken him to the mosque every Friday, and Hamid remembered the throngs of people and the cracked pavements steaming in the rain. On the way home, they went to the market, and the old man named the luscious fruit and the brightly colored vegetables for him, picking up some of them to make him smell or touch. So he has these very fond memories of going outside, and especially with Fajir. And it's such an interesting dynamic or living environment because we don't know necessarily why Hamid is here, because we know he's not related to him. He's moved, his parents, for whatever reason, sent him here. And I don't know, because this also happens in Theft, where a character is sent away from his family to like live as a servant for some other people. I won't spoil it and say how everything is connected, because that's the point of the book. But it's interesting that there seems to be a recurring thing, at least in the two things, and I will find out eventually if it keeps recurring. That relationship or that living situation of a child is sent, or a teenager is sent to go and work for basically a stranger, probably, and that he was still able to have a relationship with Fajir when he was younger and still have those moments of joy, even though he was basically working for room and board. Like he was working to be able to live there with him. So that was an interesting aspect that I wish that we had more information on. I mean, I don't think we need to have any more information about this, but yeah, it's curious to me that that's included in his stories, at least these two.
Yeah, I appreciate that you bring up that scene where he said he was handing him fruit. So again, it's very tactile, beautiful, and even though the old man had lost his sight, his vision, he was still recalling these memories of fruit from his past and was trying to have somebody else experience that. So I really resonated with that portion of the story. What was interesting to me about what you just said about the immigrant experience, right? Being cast out or being given an opportunity. I guess it depends on your perspective. Was I cast out or did I take an opportunity to live a new life? There is that estrangement. And he doesn't, in the story, Hamid doesn't really seem to think a lot about his family until he smells the sea. And it was just that, right, my people are over there. And there was one section of the story where they talked about fear. And he had fear and hatred or, very strong negative feelings towards another group of people who he could see like across the way, like across a body of water or across another section of the city. I cannot recall the detail of that. But he said one of the reasons why he had such strong negative emotions toward them is that they knew who they were and where they belonged. And he felt very disjointed. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And so I did watch a very short YouTube video on the author, and it was very clear that these themes have run throughout his life, and he really wants to make that prevalent in what he's communicating to the world. So I think he really has stayed very, very true to his aim, and I think he did a very successful job with the story of making us think, what does it feel like to be someone else?
Just going to read that section that you were just referring to. Gerda writes, there were lights on across the bay, single isolated dots that were strung across a backdrop of darkness. Who lived there, he wondered. A shiver of fear ran through him. He tried to picture people living in the dark corner of the city. His mind gave him strong images of strong men with cruel faces who peered at him and laughed. He saw dimly lit clearings where shadows lurked in wait for the stranger, and where later men and women crowded over the body. He heard the sound of their feet pounding in an old ritual and heard their cries of triumph as the blood of their enemies flowed into the pressed earth. But it was not only for the physical threat they posed that he feared the people who lived in the dark across the bay. It was because they knew where they were and he was in the middle of nowhere. Just to underscore your point there.
Joy, that was exactly perfect. Thank you for reading that. And again, one of the things that I wanted to mention about this author is so much is not in a Hemingway sense, but so much is left unspoken, but articulated on the page about feelings of lust and insecurity and loneliness and abandonment. And in some ways, it feels like the shopkeeper, Hamid, is having a little bit of an identity crisis. He's like, who am I and what am I supposed to do? He walks through the city saying the girl's name to himself. He's like, oh, it's just like she's here. I have an imaginary girlfriend. And then he's like, wait, even I know that's odd. Like, he's like, that's probably not how this is supposed to be happening. But he does also underscore that, he has physical desire for him. And he feels, I think, a little badly about it because he's like, that's what I do at night. I don't let that interfere with my day. And that takes me to the experience of Rukia. She, as like we mentioned, went through most of the story, I think about 3/4 of the story, without ever being named. She was just the beautiful young girl. Like, okay, interesting. No other women anywhere in the story. 0. Great. And she felt at the end, it was so ambiguous to me, but I landed on a side where I'm really conflicted. I felt that she was a little bit complicit in this game playing of, I am going to be nice to you and then you're going to give me a little bit extra. When things are not available to the public, you're going to reach into your private stock because you like me. And I know you like me because you're flirting with me. And he was so annoyed when Mansour, who we were like, that guy's a number one misogynistic jerk, was like, oh, I'm going to buy her and a woman's going to know that I was there and she is going to be tamed or some other ridiculous sexist nonsense.
He said
like
she's easy meat.
Yes. And I was like, pardon me, that is probably untrue. And also and he's like, what was her price? Every woman like her has a price. And I was like, you're a jerk. Get out of my story. Like, I don't even want you in the story. There's no place for you here. So we get to the end of the story and she says something almost exactly the same. She's like, if you think you're going to get me for these tiny little tokens that you've given to me over the last couple months, you got another thing coming. It's going to be a much, much bigger than that. So the cynic in me was like, oh my gosh, little baby gold digger, you did ask him. You work all the time. Everyone knows shopkeepers have a whole yard full of treasure. Can I have some? That was step one. And I was like, oh, no, Jennifer, let's have the more expansive view. the price that he will have to, quote unquote, pay to win her is what he said earlier. He will sing her songs. He will write her poems. He will woo her. He will give his heart wholly over to her. And that is a price beyond dollar signs, right? There's an emotional part. So I was just really torn because the first time I read the story, Joy, I was so mad. I was like, forget about it. I'm not even going to talk about the story because it's so bad for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think the ending is ambiguous because, in my opinion, I don't know that I've landed exactly where I think Rukia, what she's trying to do. And I don't think that she has nefarious plans here. I don't think that she is trying to get after his money, which doesn't exist anyway.
Yeah,
He doesn't have a yard full of money. But I thought that she was in on it wasn't a joke. That misogyny is not a joke. Don't say that stuff to women, okay? Don't be a pig. Just be nice. And if they say no, just go on with your day and accept it. But I think that she was trying to say, like, I heard this conversation and I'm aware that it was being said, because at the end, I'll just read what she says. Here she says, Gurnah writes, "Thank you," she said, leaning forward to take the package from him. She stayed that way for a moment longer than necessary. Then she moved back slowly. "You're always giving me things. I know you want something in return. When you do, you'll have to give me more than these little gifts." Hamid did not reply, overwhelmed with shame. The girl laughed lightly and moved away. She glanced round once, grinning at him, before she plunged into the darkness. So it is ambiguous. I agree that, like, I'm not sure. Are you in on the joke? Is she trying to say, like, this guy thinks that you can pay me like I'm a sex worker, but, like, I'm well aware that you were saying that, and I don't appreciate it. So, like, I'm going to make sure that you know. But I had a feeling, and maybe I'm just trying not to be cynical about it, which feels like that's not normally what I would do in this short story. But I kind of felt like she was trying to get to know him. And at first she was kind of like, ugh, gross. You're physically gross. And he's like, yeah, I don't bathe frequently every other day. And I don't move my body. So I'm reflecting the fact that I don't take care of myself physically. But yeah, in the end, I'm not sure if she is doing it because she's like, actually, you know what? I will do that. I will have sex with you for stuff. Or she's like, hey, buddy, like, I heard you say it. Don't appreciate it, but, whatever. I'm just going to throw it back in your face, kind of.
So, Joey, I love that interpretation of the kindness, because I can imagine being a young girl walking to the shop. She has to go to the shop, right? She's not going to a bar. She's not going to, like, a pickup site. She's like, I need to get groceries for my family after work. Please don't be a pig to me, right? So she hears the other men being just not great. And so she may have her defenses up of like, every man is irritating and I'm not dealing with it. So she said, the author wrote at one point, Hamid said that she looked at him with disdain. I'm like, disdain is a very interesting word, but it is not confused for other things, right? So he was feeling her dismissal of him and just like, get out of here, guy. Like, what are you about? And as you said, when he started treating her with admiration as an actual person, I don't think he was being like a jeering, leering guy. He was interested in her, that she responded with kindness, right? He said at one point, like, she gave him a smile and that smile carried him for days. Just seeing an actual smile. And when you said she's in on the joke, and I know that's like the wrong word for it, but she's in on the inside track. It's like, I know how the world works and I'm going to play my part. I was actually having this discussion with someone earlier today that I, as a woman of a certain age, can get away with things that a gentleman of my age probably can't get away with authority, with being like, really? I just didn't know I couldn't park there. It'll just be a minute, and like, get away with it because there's this inherent bias like, oh, harmless middle-aged old lady, I'm sure you're not doing anything wrong, where my partner would be like, oh, you're getting a $55 ticket because you were there 3 seconds longer than you needed to. And it was just a very interesting thing to think that if this story was written in the 70s or 80s, has that favoritism, that cultural, I don't even know how to call it, that cultural expectation that certain people will not be held to the same accountable standard. And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Should women be given certain considerations based on who they are, knowing that perhaps in her circumstance, 98% of the rest of her life is really confining and is penalizing her for being a woman? When she gets a win, should we let her have it? Or are we working towards a society where everyone gets treated with the same amount of respect and grace and empathy? I don't know. I'm very conflicted about this story, Jerry. About this, Joey.
Yeah,
Clearly.
I agree that, like, I'm not sure where I like the story. I know that, but I'm not sure I know where the characters are headed. What I will say is about, we can see a juxtaposition between Hamid and Mansur in how that they speak to Rakia. Because even if I'm correct about Mansur masking his homosexuality, he still says that out loud and to her. So that's still not good. Don't do that. Maybe wait until she walks away and say it in private if you have to say it at all, but whatever. But Hamid is very respectful. He doesn't say any of those things. He doesn't. And it's almost like, I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm giving this guy brownie points because he didn't do any of those things. No, this is bare minimum. This is not like, wow, congratulations, mister, you didn't sexually harass a woman. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there is a difference between their characterizations where he does not say those things. So, okay, great. He doesn't try to physically touch her in any way. He does have sexual fantasies, and we can assume that he's probably masturbating to the thought of her. He seems like he's, oddly enough, at his age, and we can assume that he's kind of older at this point. He seems to be like, this is the first time he's sort of explored his own sexuality, whether that's heterosexual or homosexual or whatever. He doesn't seem to be very aware of sexuality because he doesn't. I mean, this is a very short story, but he doesn't really talk about any previous relationships or any attractions to women or anybody else. So I have a feeling that this is the first time that he's really engaged with that side of himself. So I sort of appreciated that, like somebody, it doesn't matter your age, like this could be something that happens, his sexual awakening could happen at any age. And I did enjoy the way that he was very respectful and he kept his distance and physical space and was like, I don't know if you're ever going to change your mind. I'm not going to tell you you should. I'm not going to convince you, but I'll just be here. I have to work here anyway. So you can go to another store if you would like, and it will be completely fine. But I really appreciated that he was very respectful about, he wasn't trying to pursue her, where I think like in a romance, and this is obviously not romance, but that's sort of a cliche that like, oh, you go after the person you really are attracted to. And he's like, no, like maybe she'll come around and that'll be great. But like until then, I will just be like, here trying to be a nice guy, give her some extra sugar. So yeah, I really liked that.
Joey, I appreciate you saying that because the difference in the way that Mansour said, like that domination of women, like he just, whatever he said, it was just so gross. I don't even want to repeat it. It was just not good. It was contrasted with Hamid saying, if I get a chance to be intimate with her. He used the word intimacy, right? He didn't use a foul, polluted, kind of negative connotation of sexual intimacy. He was very like, oh, I would like to be intimate with her. And as you said, he's doing it on his own time. He is not making her feel weird or gross and be like, hey, guess what? I just had this really hot thought about you. It's like, thank you. And as you said, no gold stars for not being just a gross pig. But in this story, we are given an opportunity to see how her experience could have been different and how that might have been reflected in other spaces that she was in. Is there a safe space for her as a single woman to walk into where she's not going to get unwanted sexual harassment, for lack of a better word? And I do not think that Hamid ever harassed her. He was romantic in his own mind. He's like, she needs songs and poems and I'm going to win her. And I was like, yes, you are. Just like you won us over to this story. Because sometimes we talk about, Joey, about this didn't have complicated language. It didn't have beautiful phrases that just like rolled off my tongue that I'm like, oh, Joey, let me read this one too. Like I didn't have those moments in this story, but the very unflinchingness, is that a word? It's a word now.
I don't know.
Unflinchingness of the author to say, here are some emotions. Here are some human interactions. Here are some things that are uncomfortable. Here are some things that are so incredibly beautiful. And we see Hamid as a character. As you said, he comes into sort of his own awakening of his own self, of his sexuality, of the fact that he misses his family, that he's like, wait a minute, I haven't left the store and I don't, as you said, he didn't take care of his body. He wasn't exercising. He wasn't bathing. He just was. I'm like, oh, that sounds from this lens as a clinically depressed person, right? This is a person who is not fully engaging with the richness of life. And so when he meets the girl and he gets this crush, he changes. He decides, like, I'm getting out of here. Like, I'm going to go for a walk. Oh my gosh, look over here. There's the sea. Where's that been all my life? And yeah, I just thought that was also just, like, as you said, like, was just kind of a funny thing. I was like, first he smelled it. Or first he saw it, and then he's like, I'm going to walk over there, and he smelled it, and he's like, oh, like, it was just really poignant.
Yeah, I really do like that Hamid was the main character in this, because it was pleasant to follow him on this journey of figuring out that there is a point to life, because he doesn't have any money, and I'm not trying to say, like, oh, he's poor, so don't like him. But, like, obviously he hasn't been getting paid, even as an adult. He's no longer a teenager who came and was like, oh, I just have to work to, like, literally keep a roof over my head, even though he slept outside, where there was no roof. So I don't know how that worked out, but he doesn't have anything to, like, fall back on. He doesn't have a family that he apparently ever tried to reconnect with, and they never tried to reconnect with him, and we don't know why. Fajir doesn't seem to have any other family, so he doesn't have, like, this adopted family that he can rely on. And what happens when this guy dies? And does he inherit the store? Is it profitable? Like, we don't know this information. We don't need to know it. But I could see why he is very sort of despondent, because he just is like, I don't have money. This is not something. Oh, go ahead.
Joey, thank you for saying that, because what that just happened to me when we talked about his awakening, like his sexual awakening, maybe just the thought for him of, like, wait a minute, even if I got a wife, I couldn't afford to have one, right? The economic realities, I think, just as you were recounting sort of his life circumstance, it was like, no money, no honey, right? There's not a way for him to be able to support a family. And I think that was important to him. And I think it was the realization, as you said, what happens when Fajir dies? Because I think Fajir was advocating for euthanasia. He's like, when will this be over? I am not enjoying being an infirm old man. Like, when is this over? To your point, they are not blood relation. Who knows what the financial and legal ramifications of that would be? What if Fajir dies and you are out on your ear? It's done. The business is over. It's done. And so it's just one of those interesting, again, I'm just giving this author so much credit for the beautiful way he weaves these little threads throughout the story that we can either pick up or not. But I think this is something to reflect upon. It's like society was created in such a way in this community that this young man perhaps didn't have the financial freedom to pursue his happiness with a family. And I just thought that was really well done, but also very sad, and sadly relevant in 2025 as we're talking about this with generations of people who are facing similar financial insecurity.
Yeah, I think that Gurnah did such a great job of making the reader question, like, oh, well, what kind of cage do I live in? Like, what's my metaphorical cage? And, like, is it something that I could just go outside and get out of, like Hamid can? Because it doesn't seem like this was ever, he never really had a reason until Rukia shows up, and he's like, there's stuff out there, and I don't have to be scared of it. Like, I could just go out. And I mean, he does end up being a little scared, and he goes back home. But I think that's what I really love about literature and literary fiction in particular, is that that's a kind of question, this existential question that you're left with, is like, what does that look like for me? How do I fit into this narrative? And how does that help you have empathy for others, which we always talk about. Every episode we talk about, how does this give you empathy? Because that's an essential thing about to be a human, is you should have empathy, obviously. But it really helps you have some introspection and then figure out, like, what is going on with me, and who do I relate to most in this story, and which character do I feel most seen with. I really love that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Joey, because that also brought up for me, just as you were speaking, power dynamics. Who has the power here? Fajir theoretically has the power because he is the store owner, but he has lost his physical power. He's no longer able to maintain his own life or care for himself without two helpers helping him. The young lady seems like she's working. She says she works in the best hotel in their city, and she was very proud of that. But even in her description of being proud about her job, she talks about the Europeans who come, and they're like, they have a status. And she's like, oh, we don't let the people from the bush come in because they ruin the sheets. And so even in that hierarchy of how she was thinking, it was like, well, that felt like a very unkind way to view a group of people, but it probably was also true to her experience. And so I just think he did such a masterful job of saying who has power in this situation. Because she has the power, her autonomy, right? If assuming she chooses him, she can merge her life with his. She hopefully will never have to deal with a unwanted sexual situation with Mansour, but you know, every woman who walks the earth, there's not 100% guarantee that something isn't going to happen to you at any time. There's just, those are the breaks, unfortunately. But what will Hamid's life be like if his income goes away? Will he have to go back to his family? Will he be accepted? Will he always be seen as other because he's had this more expansive experience than the people who stayed home? Just as you said, a lot to think through for our own viewpoints. What cages are right in front of our faces that we probably have looked through the bars and like, oh, I'm not in a cage. I'm like, really? If you took us, oh, wait, there's the bar, there's the cage.
Yeah, it's interesting that because I didn't even think, I kind of just like read over the European comments that Rukia had made. But yeah, he writes about colonialism, as you said in the introduction. So it's interesting that her perspective on the Europeans, the colonizers, okay, is that they're clean and sort of worthy, and they have the financial ability to access the finest hotel in whatever city they're in. And then she compares the people from that area who are from the bush, as she called them, that they are physically dirty and they would ruin and sully and taint the hotel itself, which is like, well, it's where they live, though. So, like, shouldn't they have access to the place that they live? Why can't you go to a fancy hotel? So it's interesting that dynamic that is put in there, and it's so subtle to me. It was subtle. In his other book, Theft, it's obvious. It's pretty obvious to me, and maybe I wasn't just thinking about it at the time when I read this story, but yeah, it's interesting that he includes that because there's probably more nuance to that than I will understand as someone that's not from this part of the world and doesn't have that lived experience, where there's probably more to that. It probably means more to somebody that has lived a similar life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, Joey. And one of the things that seemed really beautiful about the way that you expressed how she was going about her job, she did not seem resentful for people coming into her country, bringing funds. You know, that was her job. And so I appreciated the nuance of if you were in a place where foreign investment and foreign tourism pays your paycheck, I think it would be very easy to have some resentment built around that. And I think she, at least in the brief interactions that we had, sort of looking from her perspective and the things that she actually said in the story, that she was proud of working there. She was happy to have a job at the quote unquote best place. And I think that says a lot about, you know, your own self-esteem and your own ideas about your place in the world and your value. And just like all of those things to me feel baked into this very, very short sentence that they put into the story. So kudos to this writer. I am so excited, Joey, that there is a new novel, as you said, Theft, that just came out. And I was curious for myself to read Afterlives, which was his novel that came out in 2021. Yeah, I think we will be hearing more and discussing.
Oh, wait, did you read it?
No, I look forward to it.
I thought you said, oh, I read that. I was like, damn, you just mentioned it at the end. We were talking about this whole time.
No, I wouldn't throw a surprise curveball, and I would never lie. So I would never lie about that.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm curious to continue reading more of his stuff. I obviously own Paradise now, so I will read that one.
Lucky Joey, own in Paradise.
Yeah, oh, if only.
And Joey, can we just for one quick second talk about his naming conventions of his novels and his story. So we have theft, we have afterlives, and we have cages. And as you said, it's very interesting that in some of the stories that we love, right?
Okay.
Flannery O'Connor's story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. As you said, that was a line taken directly from the story, and it was very indicative of like, okay, well, we're going to figure out what's a good man and why are they hard to find, and just leads you to so much.
Where are
But,
they?
like, what is that? That's such an interesting title. So Cages, he set us up for that. I haven't read Afterlives yet, but they say it's about a historical fiction, so there will be some historical context in there. And Theft, from just the little I've heard from you about it, it feels like there's some thieving going on.
It's it's in there. I don't want to ruin it for anybody. If
That's
you
all
want
I'm
to
going to
read
say.
it.
And it's like, it
But
can
yes,
be
there
on
is-
so many
it's in
levels,
there.
right?
Yeah. It's hard to
great.
spoil that book, though, I think, because you're just really getting to know the characters the whole time. So it doesn't, like, if I told you what it was, it's not going to be a big deal. But I think, like, it's part of the tension, so I won't.
And as we often say, read it and find out, right?
Yeah.
Don't let us tell you what the story is about. Read it yourself and see how it affects you. So, Joey, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation about a story that I was 100% against on first read. And now I have completely changed my mind and talk about that often, that like, that's the joy of being in conversation, that you don't have to stick with your initial impression. You can grow, you can think about it. You can double down on it if you feel so inclined. But yeah, thank you for that. So looking forward to reading another great story with you, Joey. So if you're interested, listeners, on what story that will be, check out our website and you will have a sneak peek into what's coming up for next week.